Today we want to look at reading skill readiness. Reading is very important in the life of a child. It is an important skill that a child must acquire because it's very germane to the child's success when it comes to academic exercise. So let's start by looking at reading. What is reading? Reading can be defined as looking at and being able to understand written or printed material words of an author. You can say it is an interpretation of written symbols. Reading is the ability to make sense out of written or printed symbols. Reading can be fun, and it is fun, a source of pleasure, and a means for language development. Reading is very fundamental to language development. Reading is interaction between the reader's resources and the text data. The reader's resources are his knowledge about his culture, his family, his community, the economic and social activities, as well as his language. The text data are the property of the printed words, such as words, sentences, and how words are linked together to form sentences, and how they are organized in novels, how they are organized in short stories, how they are organized in folktales, in myths and legends, and so on. So, in literature, language is very fundamental. And in reading, language is the basis in which reading can be developed. So that means that for reading to be effective, language has a role to play. And for language development, reading also has a very germane role to play. So reading is a complex system of operation that involves the eyes, the brain, the nervous system, and the ears. That means for reading to take place, the eyes will perceive the symbol, and messages will be sent to the brain. The brain, the nervous system, will interpret the symbols, and then the interpretation of the symbols will cumulate to what the eyes have seen as a word, and then the interpretation will come up from the brain and the nervous system, as well as the ears when it is reading aloud. So in reading, the eyes and the brain are deeply involved before any meaningful reading can take place. For effective reading, the eyes will see the symbol, the brain will interpret the symbol, and that is when effective reading can take place. Reading is an active process that requires full concentration. Why it requires full concentration is that it is a thinking ability. Because it requires the thinking ability of the reader. So for effective reading to take place, there requires full concentration of the reader and also a very high thinking ability of the reader. Reading is seen as an indispensable tool of learning in various hierarchies of modern education. It is very important right from the foundational level of modern education, right from kindergarten. Reading is seen as a very important tool that when a child is being brought up and the child has really embraced reading, then such a child will automatically find education, modern educational system, very easier to cope with. Reading is a complex cognitive process in which the reader, through interaction with the text, constructs meaning based on previous knowledge. So for you to interpret, for interpretation of reading to take place, the reader has to have had the knowledge of the alphabet of the language that is reading. For example, if you don't have the knowledge of the alphabet of French, you won't be able to read French. And so for reading to take place, it requires cognitive process of the alphabet of the language, which the reader interacted with in the text, and then through that, meaning is being able to, the reader is being able to source for the meaning of what he has. Reading is a receptive skill that involves the ability to interpret or decode printed symbols. The learning of reading starts from the mastery of the alphabet of the language. You remember I said that the foundation of reading is the alphabet of the language. If you don't have the foundation of the alphabet of the language, if you don't have the alphabet of the language, which is the foundation, then reading becomes impossible in that language. So reading is the active thinking process of understanding an author's idea, connecting those ideas to what you already know, and organizing all the ideas into order to which you in order for you to remember and to use them. Reading is the interpretation of meaning of printed symbols. The skills should be effectively taught, as it is a valuable asset to anyone who desires to exploit the universe of gameful living. What we are saying is that reading skill is very, very important. For a child to cope with academic activity, the child needs to be taught how to read. So reading is a valuable asset to anyone that desire or that wants to exploit the formal educational system. It is a vital skill to formal education. When there is a problem with the foundation, which is reading skill, the child will have to contend with problem of learning in formal educational system. So reading is the key to a meaningful and purposeful life. A person who cannot read is like a blind man who has to be guided and who could also be wrongly guided. So reading is a means to knowledge. It becomes imperative for you as teachers to equip primary school pupils with the skills, with this skill reading early in life. So you as teachers at the primary school level, you have to teach your pupils how to read. And reading starts from knowing and identifying the alphabet. Reading is a fluent process of readers combining information from a text with their own um, with their own knowledge, with their own background. It is a complex cognitive process in which the reader, through interaction with the text, constructs meaning around knowledge to build meaning. Learning to read is one of the most important of all developmental tasks because school success depends largely on reading success. So school success is predicted on reading success. So reading is the basis for any form of formal. So let's now look at what is reading readiness. When we talk of readiness, it means you are prepared, you are ready. And so we want to see what reading readiness means, especially for us as teachers, so that when we want to teach our pupils reading, we will know, we will be able to dictate that they are ready to learn, and so it will make reading effective in them. Reading readiness means psychologically and intellectually readiness of a child towards reading activities. That is, the child should be psychologically ready and it should be intellectually ready towards reading tasks. Remember in our previous class, we said age 6 is recognized by UNESCO as the age where the child is psychologically and intellectually mature to cope with formal activities, to cope with school system. So that means that in reading readiness also, as a teacher, we must study that the child is psychologically ready and the child is intellectually ready so that he will be able to cope with reading activities. Reading readiness is a state of development which prepares the child mentally and emotionally for reading experiences. The child becomes ready, willing, and capable to read. Reading readiness is influenced by a group of interrelated factors, which can be classified as physical factors, mental factors, social and emotional factors. That is physical. You remember in our class when we talk of physical developmental stage, when the child has developed, and we said the body will have increased. The child that you want to teach how to read must not be a child of 1 month. No, it must be physically ready. Intellectually, the child must be ready. Mentally, it must be ready. Social and emotionally, the child must be ready. And readiness is vital to learning. When you are ready, learning is faster, unlike when the child is not ready. So the teacher should not be anxious to teach the child how to read, especially when the child is not mentally, physically, and psychologically ready for it. Reading should be taught only when the child has attained a mental maturity. Remember, in our developmental class, we said the child must be mentally mature and it must be physically ready. There must be physical growth. You cannot teach a child of 1 month, like I said, how to read. So the child must have attained a mental maturity. Then there is need for adequate oral language development. The child must have developed listening and speaking skills. The child must have adequate oral language capability, and the child must have interest and desire to read. When all these are in place, then reading becomes effective. Then readiness on the part of the child is there. So it is at maturity stage and developmental stage that reading can take place at the in the child. It is when the child is matured and developmentally the child is ready, that is when reading can take place in the child. Reading readiness is the point at which a person is ready to learn and the time which a person transitions from being a non-reader into a reader. So in reading readiness, it means on the part of the person, the person is ready. There's readiness on the part of the person to learn to read, and the person also transits from being a non-reader into a reader. So reading readiness can be seen as the stage in developmental as the developmental stage when either maturation or previous learning or even both on the individual child can learn to read easily and profitably. So, as a literature teacher, use different ways of observation to determine when your pupils are ready to read children's literature. Define the task of reading and consider which abilities or experiences are necessary for children to be successful at the task of reading children's literature. The following skills are important to consider to determine if a child is ready to read, especially if the child is ready to read literature. Number 1, the child's oral language ability. 2, the child experimental background. 3, the child auditory and visual discrimination skills. 4, the child intellectual ability. 5, the child's positive attitude towards and interest in reading. Positive attitude and interest in reading. Then lastly, the child's emotional and social maturity. Let us examine this one after the other. Oral language ability. The Nigerian child is expected to be fluent in his mother tongue or in the language of the environment by the time he is admitted into school. He may communicate a little or even not in English. So it is now the teacher's responsibility. So the teacher must ensure that pupils are able to speak enough English to recognize the words in print. So much of the task now fall on the teacher to teach the students to speak enough English that will help them to recognize words in print. And that is why when children first come to school, the first thing they are exposed to is the alphabet. At that stage, they are even just learning it. Majority of them pick the word even from rhymes. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Gradually, they will be able to identify the letters. And gradually, the teacher will introduce them to 2-letter words, 3-letter words, 4-letter words, and gradually, reading will start. Short sentences. It is a basket. This is a man. And this is why teachers should make efforts to encourage children to talk and use English in oral drills and conversation in literature. The second point, remember, is experimental background, experiential background. When a child needs about what he has also experienced, when a child reads about what he has also experienced or done, he has greater in-depth of what he has or of what he is reading or what he has read. So he has a greater depth of understanding what that thing is all about. The more activities or experiences a child has had in life about what he's reading before coming to school, the more stories he will be able to relate to, because the story will be able to tell him something that is familiar with what he has experienced. Therefore, he will find it easier to read with understanding. Thus, his background knowledge will help him with his comprehension ability. And this is very, very important. The experience, the background of the child also have a role to play in helping the child to read. Auditory and visual discrimination. This is also important. Let us look at the language English that the child is reading literature through. The English alphabet contains 26 letters, but there are nearly twice that number in consonant and vowel sounds. In most of the vernacular languages in Nigeria, which have a written orthography, use the English alphabet system with modifications to show where a sound is not present in English but appears in the vernacular. As a result, it is easier for pupils to differentiate sounds in English when such sounds are also present in their mother tongue. But when they are not, problem arises. When sounds of many letters or words are not available, and when that happens, there is interference issue. So skills in identifying similarities and distinguishing differences in sounds and shapes are very important for coding words in printing when learning to read. So it is for us as teachers to help them to identify similarities and differences, and also to help them in sounds and in getting the right sounds and shapes that are important for them to decode words in print when they are being taught how. Intellectual ability. Every child can learn to read, whether he is a slow learner, an average learner, or a child of high ability. So it is generally agreed that children of average or above average intelligence will have less difficulty in learning to read. Meanwhile, that doesn't mean you as a teacher should abandon the low ones or the average ones. They also must be brought along, and also they must be encouraged, especially those ones that are very low in reading. Emotional and social maturity also play a very important part in reading readiness and in reading activities. Learning to read is done in a classroom environment. Part of classroom etiquette requires that Children accept direction and guidance from teachers. It also requires that the child also cooperate with other children or classmates. So a child that exhibits emotional behavior, or immaturity behavior, such as withdrawal, aggression, extreme shyness, restlessness, or inability to sit quiet and listen. All these are problems that can hinder reading activities or that can hinder reading readiness in the child. These negative characteristics can prevent the learner or even stop the learner from succeeding in reading tasks and reading activities. Let us now look at activities for developing pre-reading activities. What do we mean by pre-reading? Pre-reading is an initial stage in the teaching of pupils how to read. It is a skill that leads to ability to read. So it's like a preparatory level for the child so that the child will be able to cope with reading. So pre-reading are activities such as games, matchmaking, different different ways in which the child will see reading as pleasurable so that he will be able to develop interest in reading. Pre-reading helps to prepare students towards reading tasks. The activities for developing pre-reading activities are oral language experimental background activities, visual discrimination activities, auditory discrimination activities. Let us look at this after the other. Oral language and experimental background activities. On daily basis, you as a teacher should allotted time to discussion. Make sure that on daily basis in your class, time should be given to discussion. First, it could be in vernacular and gradually in English. But if the students are comfortable with English, encourage them to have a discussion on daily basis in English. By doing that, you are developing the ability gradually in both speaking and reading. So the activity of show and tell can encourage children to talk. Each week, different pupils can be asked to bring items from home to class. These items are shown to the class. What the owner tell the class something about the items. Examples are favorite toys, pets, a special article of clothing for exhibition and discussion, which the students will display, which the child will display, and say something to the class about it. We call this show and tell. So the oral level, the oracy, and experimental background of the child has been put together for the child to discuss so that the child will be encouraged to show, to see, and tell. And then it will encourage his classmates also to say something concerning what is being shown. Then we have visual discrimination activities. This deals with a variety of sorting activities that requires pupils to sort objects, things into similar groups, giving visual discrimination practice. Different items like bottle tops, buttons, seed and common objects in homes can be utilized. This can be done by sorting them based on color, based on sizes, based on shape, based on long or short. All these tools are used to help them so that they will be able to discriminate objects based on different classes that these objects belong to. Then we have auditory discrimination activities. This usually starts with listening to sound of general nature and imitating such sounds like that of animals, that of general sound. You ask them to produce sounds of a bike, sounds of motor, of a car. So you move to listen and to the sound of English words. You can use words like rhyme, You can use words to that have rhyme-like example of rhyme-like word: bread and bed, boy and toy, fish and dish, and so on. Remember, you as a teacher, you are a model. You are a role model. And so, whatsoever you do, whatsoever you pronounce, your pronunciation is what also they will imitate. What you do, your pupils will do them. So if you practice so well, you are also helping your students. There are many activities that you as teacher can do to increase children's literature reading readiness. These include oral language, like we have examined, visual discrimination, auditory activities. Before children can read literature textbooks, you need to check if they are ready, and in fact, if they are ready to read. When they are ready, this readiness can be seen in how well they speak, if they have had a variety of experience, that is their background. You can tell differences between similar sounds and shapes. They are smart, they are alert, and that shows that they are interested and they're excited by books. When they do this, and they also get along with their classmates, it means your pupils are ready. It means reading readiness is very high in them. And so, as a teacher, you can quickly introduce them to reading. However, when they are not ready as teachers, you have to help them to develop necessary abilities, necessary activities, through which variety of activities can be developed in them, and so that their reading readiness could be propelled, and their reading readiness could be developed, and so that they will be ready to read. Thank you for listening. We will meet again.